Society of the Snow has been nominated for 2 Academy Awards. A Spanish language film about the rugby team that's plane crash lands in the Andes, forcing the remaining survivors to do whatever it takes to stay alive. In 1993, a Hollywood version of the true story was made starring Ethan Hawke. It was called Alive, and to be fair, a story about a South American rugby team would be best told with the representation it receives in Society of the Snow. But it also comes with a lot of critical acclaim for a remake. Last year at the Oscars, All Quiet on the Western Front, a German language remake of the 1930 Best Picture winner, took home 4 Academy Awards. Along with Best International Film, it took home Original Score, Makeup and Hairstyling, and Cinematography. It was also nominated for Best Picture, losing to Everything Everywhere All at Once. Again, pretty impressive for a remake. And it got me thinking about the upcoming release schedule in 2024. Dune Part 2 arrives in March, an adaptation of the famous books, but also a remake of the 1984 David Lynch film. The Omen is going to get a remake with The First Omen. The Universal monster The Wolfman will try to be revived once again this year. Stephen King's Salem Lot is getting a wide release remake in December, and yet another vampire remake of Nosferatu will hit cinemas this Christmas. And Disney's live-action Snow White film is still on track to release in 2025. So many remakes arrive every year in theaters that got me thinking about their enduring legacy in Hollywood. Why do they keep getting remade? Are some remakes better than their originals? And why do we keep spending money on stories we've already seen? Welcome to Another Lens. My name's Jay Kennedy, and I like movies. On this show, I'd like to explore what's happening today in the world of film, dive into Hollywood's short history, and share with you my thoughts about what's rattling around in my head when it comes to movies. So if you'll join me, grab a hot cup, get comfy, and let's take a look from another lens. Before we get started, we're talking about remakes. And a remake isn't a prequel like the incredible Planet of the Apes series starring Andy Serkis. It's also not a soft reboot like Sam Raimi's hilariously delightful horror comedy Evil Dead 2, which presents as the same story, but essentially expands on the original with a significant budget and a more comedic tone. It's also considered a sequel, even if it sort of stands alone. A remake's intention is to tell the same story, but update it for new technology or showcase clear themes of present day, both of which can be seen with All Quiet on the Western Front and Society of the Snow, bringing needed representation to stories about their respective countrymen. And while we see more remakes every year, this has been happening in Hollywood for a while. One of the earliest instances of a movie being remade is the silent film The Squaw Man. The original version, directed by Cecil B. DeMille, was released in 1914. The interesting aspect is that DeMille later remade the film in 1918 and then again in 1931. This makes The Squaw Man notable as one of the earliest examples of a filmmaker remaking their own work. While the concept of remakes wasn't as common in the early days of cinema, The Squaw Man stands out as an early instance of a film being revisited and reinterpreted by its original director. In fact, Cecil B. DeMille would go on to remake another one of his early works, The Ten Commandments, in 1956, starring Charlton Heston. He intended to update his original silent film with color and a larger runtime, and the remake succeeded in creating the highest-grossing film of that time. Joining DeMille, here are some other filmmakers who remade their own work. Alfred Hitchcock made The Man Who Knew Too Much twice. Michael Haneke made his thriller Funny Games twice for audiences. And even Michael Mann took his TV movie LA Takedown and revived it for audiences as Heat. And let's not even get into directors taking their shorts and turning them into features. It's not really difficult to see why this works time and time again. A recognized hit film coming back to cinemas with more spectacle sparks promotion and excitement, with an opportunity to capture an already existing audience that loves the film. But sometimes it backfires. In 1959, the Best Picture winner was a remake. It was another epic feature and also starred Charlton Heston. There was a religious angle and it won a whopping 11 Oscars. The film was Ben-Hur, and it was a remake of the 1907 film of the same title. Years later, in 2016, the film will be remade again, but this time it would arrive to very little fanfare. It was a flop critically, and audiences didn't rush out to see it. The epic retelling didn't even recoup its $100 million budget back at the box office. And I think the reason for this is that sometimes we love something so much that we don't ever want to see it remade. I can't tell you the amount of times I've exclaimed, I never want to see Jaws remade, because they'll give us a CGI shark up front, missing the true elements of what made Jaws awesome. The wonderful characters on the orca, and being afraid of what's under the surface that you can't actually see. Even the young Spielberg wanted to show the shark right away back in 1975, but when it didn't work, they had to get creative, and everyone will agree it worked to the benefit of the film. So why do filmmakers even do it? Why do they remake the movies they love? One thought is that filmmakers want to pay homage to the films they love, regardless of that outcome. Gus Van Sant's 1998 version of Psycho certainly gives a loving shot-for-shot remake, but it never feels worth your time. Just go and enjoy the 1960s Hitchcock original. Trust me, it holds up. Then there's advancements in technology. A great example of this is John Carpenter's The Thing, which is a remake of 1951's The Thing from Another World. The 1982 film is widely celebrated for its groundbreaking and visceral special effects, created by a talented team led by Rob Bottin. The film's special effects played a crucial role in creating a sense of terror. It's part disgusting and part shocking, which makes for incredible scares. And these were effects that were not available in the 1950s. And while John Carpenter's The Thing bombed at the box office, its impact on the horror genre and special effects craftsmanship continues to be celebrated decades after its release. And when I asked the film community on social media what the best remake of all time is, The Thing was often the answer. On a personal note, the remake is also light years better than the original, which is a B-movie claustrophobic film about an alien plant creature. The horror genre is often picked at time and time again with remakes. Some great and some wretched. Among the greats are David Cronenberg's The Fly from 1986, which also took advantage of new technologies to create the disgusting Brundle fly. The original from 1958 followed the same story beats, except instead of a molting man, the actor was shoved into a costume, which really did warrant an update. Another hit with critics was the reboot of Sam Raimi's 1981 Evil Dead, which added more weight to our possessed character who was at the cabin in the woods to combat a heroin addiction. The gore and special effects also benefited greatly from the 32-year difference between the two. And I'd be remiss not to add one of my favorite remakes to the pile, 2009's Friday the 13th, basically amalgamating the first 4 of the iconic slasher franchise together, giving us a well-crafted Jason Voorhees flick, one that nods to the sexy rock and roll antics of the 80s while delivering us the hockey mask killer right up front. But for every refresh that gets it right, we also get a Nightmare on Elm Street remake that doesn't realize what made the originals work to begin with. Another special effects spectacle in the horror genre was the remake of The Mummy, starring Brendan Fraser. The film set out to adapt the Boris Karloff monster movie of the same title and created a new family-friendly franchise with 2 sequels and the Dwayne Johnson starring spin-off, The Scorpion King. The Scorpion King had its own franchise life on home video with 4 more sequels that I certainly have never seen. And this brings us to another reason why remakes are constantly in the works, so that studios can hold on to the best version of the copyrighted material. A great example of remaking the content is the Spider-Man franchise. Sony owns the licensed film rights indefinitely as long as they produce a movie every 5.75 years. Another example of copyright comes with Frankenstein. The way the monster looks with the bolts in its neck, that Boris Karloff look, that's copyrighted by Universal. Same with Dracula's slick back hair, cape, and amulet. Since the original books by Stoker and Shelley entered the public domain years before the films, there needed to be something that was exclusive to the Universal Monsters copyright. And you can see these differences in some of the most famous remakes of all time. The Hammer Horror Collection. The standout is likely Horror of Dracula, a remake of the original Bela Lugosi-led Dracula. Arguably, this 1958 version starring Christopher Lee was sexier and more lust-filled. The addition of red blood to his lips is now iconic, and the film is much scarier. The other Hammer adaptations included Curse of the Werewolf, a new reinvention of the Wolfman. The Mummy, also starring Christopher Lee, was a remake that saw the true villain as not the mummy, but the puppeteer controlling the monster's vengeance. And of course, The Curse of Frankenstein reinvents Dr. Frankenstein as a sociopath, not tragic, but deserving of his own end. And since color has now been invented, Frankenstein's monster is now dipped in grotesque green paint. But certainly the Universal Monster movies aren't the only ones to be remade over the years. Perhaps the most famous monster of all time will be seen again on the big screen again this year. In 1933, an adventure film was made and its stop-motion effects lay waste to anything anyone had seen before. The story followed a group to a mysterious island, with filmmakers searching for never-before-seen on-footage marvels. And what they encountered would change everything. It was a giant, the inhabitants of the island named Kong. The enduring appeal of King Kong and the exciting advancements in technology have made so many filmmakers excited to share their own visions with contemporary audiences. And for better or worse, this has contributed to the multiple renditions of the iconic giant ape. After the success in 1933, a sequel, Son of Kong, was released later that same year. We would see King Kong fight Godzilla for the first time in 1962. This rendition had 2 dudes in suits punching and kicking one another. In 1976, the first full-scale remake was released starring Jeff Bridges, Jessica Lange, and the late Charles Grodin. Now, Kong was built with massive animatronics, built larger than ever. Lord of the Rings director Peter Jackson would remake Kong in 2005 with Naomi Watts, Adrian Brody, and Jack Black, filling in Kong with computer-generated imagery and Andy Serkis in motion capture. The latest rendition of King Kong was remade and set during the Vietnam War. It was called Kong Skull Island and brought new monsters and tied the behemoth to the ongoing Monsterverse with Godzilla, another titan in the remake game. In fact, we just saw a new rendition of the classic character WoW Critics just last year with Godzilla -1, and we've watched Godzilla and Kong rack in dollars at the box office. Their upcoming Godzilla X Kong is sure to see people pouring into theaters to cheer on the behemoths as they go head-to-head with some ridiculous new villain cooked up in a robotic lab. And that theme of nature versus man is ever present in these films, which continue to make them relevant today. And with that recognized IP, filmmakers can get across a message while still putting up massive box office profits. Seems like a win for studios to remake their past triumphs. But Hollywood doesn't only create massive remakes for the horror and monster movie genres. We've laughed along with some of the best comedy remakes as well. In 1940, Jimmy Stewart and Margaret Sullivan starred in The Shop Around the Corner, a film about pen pals who fall in love, not realizing they work together and actually despise one another. 58 years later, it would be Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan's turn, with the pair finding themselves in the digital age of email for the remake, You've Got Mail. Interestingly, one of their most popular outings by the same director, Sleepless in Seattle, is a soft stand-in for An Affair to Remember. But, to be clear, not nearly as good. Romantic comedies are certainly fodder for remakes as well. The screwball comedy His Girl Friday from 1940, directed by Howard Hawks, would laughingly be remade with Burt Reynolds and Kathleen Turner in 1988's Switching Channels, converting the newspaper biz to the newscasts on television. Funny man success story Adam Sandler has even gotten in on the action with a remake of The Longest Yard in 2005 and remaking Frank Capra's Mr. Deeds Goes to Town as Mr. Deeds in 2002. One of the more obscure comedies that I could find remade was 2000's Meet the Parents, starring Ben Stiller. Universal had purchased the rights from a 1992 indie film of the same name and rejigged the story for a wide audience. So certainly there are no limits to where Hollywood will take the remakes. And another reason to keep rehashing these stories is a little bit more obvious in today's climate. It's brand recognition. Remaking a successful movie can capitalize on the original, and copyright holders may see remakes as an opportunity to reintroduce a well-known story or characters to a new audience. So in a way, these remakes are bringing a new return on investment to studios, also casting a wider net for movies that may not be revisited as often or have simply been forgotten. An example that comes to mind is Ocean's 11. In 1960, the Rat Pack starred in a heist movie that took place in Las Vegas. The Rat Pack got people in the door, and it was all the standards of cool for the day. But it didn't have much staying power. In 2001, Steven Soderbergh's version was released. It has the same cool vibes popular to audiences at the time, but offered better characters, better editing, better laughs, and by far a better ending than the original ever did. It's no wonder it went on to make 2 sequels and a spin-off. And as we've talked about earlier, Academy Award winners get into the action too. The Departed, Martin Scorsese's Best Picture winner from 2006, is a remake of Hong Kong's 2002 crime film Infernal Affairs. And it's not the only one. You might not believe it, but The Sound of Music in 1965 was a remake of a German film called Die Trapp Family from 1956. It seems Hollywood does have a thing for remaking international cinema and bringing it to North American audiences. 2016's The Magnificent Seven is a remake of the original Magnificent Seven, which is a remake of Akira Kurosawa's Seven Samurai. Vanilla Sky, starring Tom Cruise, was a remake of Abre los Ojos in 1997, and Christopher Nolan's Insomnia, starring Robin Williams and Al Pacino, is in fact a remake of a 1997 Norwegian film. The Ring, Oldboy, Let Me In, and so many more were all remakes of foreign language films that were brought to America in search of more dollars. Parasite, the 2019 Best Picture winner from South Korea, is currently being remade into an English language television series. And I don't know how I feel about all this, if I'm being honest. It feels more like poaching the talent from outside the Western world than actually honing what we have here. What copywriters do when they make a remake is maintain the preservation of the original work though. And that's fantastic. By retaining control, they can oversee the adaptation process to prevent any deviations that might harm the reputation of the original. But also knowing what we know, remakes are going to be remade regardless of our input, and that quality is never guaranteed. Let's face it, no one asked for Footloose to be remade. There are so many remakes we didn't touch on today. All 3 remakes of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, Peter Sellers' Pink Panther turned into Steve Martin's Pink Panther, Jerry Lewis's The Nutty Professor passing hands to Eddie Murphy, or how about the Disney live adaptations, one of which is the highest grossing remake of all time with The Lion King in 2019. But with everything we've gone through today, I'm reminded of my thoughts when I first saw a trailer for Jumanji: Welcome to the Jungle, which granted ended up being a spiritual sequel rather than a remake, but I ended up sharing my thoughts with the film community and I think I still believe them. Here's what I wrote. I had an epiphany. They're not taking a shot at my nostalgia. My Jumanji is from 1995, but I'm old. And the kids of today don't have a Jumanji. Sure, their parents could go back and show them the original, but they're so used to CGI in action, would it hold up for them? My Cape Fear is Scorsese's 1991 thriller, but my mother-in-law's very well could be the 1962 film with Gregory Peck. My version of Father of the Bride doesn't star Spencer Tracy in 1950, but my father's might. My Little Shop of Horrors comes with a singing Audrey from lyricist Howard Ashman in 1986. But my mother's might be the 1960s version. So after all this time, I get it. I'm old. These are getting remade not for me, but for the generation that missed an original run and will claim the new renditions as their own. And knowing that it's not for me gives me a little power to turn my brain off and say, I'm okay, I'm good. And in this tradition of remaking classic films, the films get a chance to live on. And without them, we would never see Mangold's 3:10 to Yuma or Fincher's Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, Gerwig's version of Little Women. Hell, Best Picture nominee starring Bradley Cooper and Lady Gaga, 2018's A Star is Born has been remade not once, not twice, but 3 times. So all you can do is cross your fingers, roll your eyes, and maybe crack a smile, remembering the original will get some more plays. And with this episode in the books, I'm gonna go revisit Swayze at the Double Deuce before Jake Gyllenhaal steps into Dalton's shoes for Amazon Prime's remake of Roadhouse. I really appreciate you sticking through to the end. Reach out to me anytime at j.kennedy@outlook.com. And now, the Another Lens podcast can be found on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. New episodes are available weekly, so be sure to subscribe for the next one. I'm Jay Kennedy, and you've been listening to Another Lens. The show will be back soon with a new perspective.